in the 1980s, it was a very hard time and people were in obvious need of healing. It was as dark a time as we're living in right now. And I saw a lot of people that needed healing. So I thought I have access to this plant, and it did this transformation for me. I've been activated. My compassion, my empathy has been activated. My inspiration's been activated. My politics has been activated. And gosh, maybe I can get this to other people, this plant, and maybe the same thing will happen to them.
Welcome to the Modern Psychedelics podcast. Thank you so much for being here and choosing to spend some time with me today. I'm your host, Lana. This is the place where we explore how modern humans can work with psychedelics and plant medicine to engage more deeply with life. You can expect balanced and grounded conversations around therapeutic, spiritual, and recreational containers. All right, let's journey. Setting aside the time, energy, and money for a full psychedelic experience can be a lot. That's why I love Canna. It's a gentle ally for daily support that actually gives results. Canna is a succulent from South Africa that has been traditionally used by indigenous communities such as the Khoi and the San people for mood enhancement, stress relief, and spiritual practices. Canna is an empathogen, so it helps emphasize feelings of connectedness, open-heartedness, and calm. It also happens to be pretty well researched. In fact, one of the active alkaloids in Canna is prescribed as a pharmaceutical for anxiety and depression. The best part is that it's completely legal in North America and sold as a health product. But the Canna supplements you'll find in stores is table grade, so they're not active in the alkaloids that make a difference. Canna Extract Co. is leading the way in creating quality, potent extracts. Their signature extraction process ensures absolute purity and precise alkaloid profiles. For you, this means unparalleled potency and the amazing felt effects. If you want to learn more about this plant medicine, check out episode 74 with Ryan Luttrell. Canna Extract Co. also ethically sources their medicine, working with growers who uphold benefit sharing agreements with traditional knowledge keepers, and we love that. Start your journey with Canna today. Visit cannaextract.com and you can use Lana at checkout to save 10%. That's Canna Extract, Kanna extract.com, and use Lana, Lana, at checkout to save 10% off your first order. All right, back to the episode. Hello, beautiful human beings. I hope that you are easing into December gracefully. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to remind you that I would love your feedback on the show. I'm currently taking a little zoom out, re-evaluating the show, and I really want to make sure that it continues to be supportive and valuable to you, the listeners. So if you haven't already, please take a few minutes to fill out the community feedback form that I've linked in the show notes so that I can get your feedback about what you like, what you don't like, what you want more of, what you want less of, and so that we can continue on this learning journey of psychedelics and personal development together. Let's get into today's guest. During this interview, we have a veteran cannabis industry leader. He's an advocate. He's certainly an expert. And I had so much fun talking to Andrew DeAngelo that by the end of this interview, both of our cheeks were hurting from just laughing and smiling so much. We had so much fun, which is really fitting because in this interview, I asked Andrew what the, teaching style of cannabis is. And he mentioned that it has this humorous essence to it. So yeah, we were just fully tapped into cannabis. Cannabis is a medicine that I love. I know that a lot of you love. I have a really beautiful relationship with it, but I haven't talked too much about it on the show, and I actually don't know too much about it. So it's an honor to be, as always, on this learning journey together. Andrew is a very accomplished changemaker. So listen closely as I read his bio to all of the incredible impact that he has made in the 40 years that he has been involved in cannabis. Andrew DeAngelo is a visionary leader with a proven track record of enacting systemic social change and developing best practices in cannabis. Andrew leads his vast cannabis business and political expertise as a consultant for hire to the global cannabis community at large, including several strategic partnerships with the world's leading cannabis-centric service firms. Over 3 decades as an activist, Andrew worked on a variety of voter initiatives which legalized medical and adult use cannabis in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and the state of California. As a co-founder of Harborside, Andrew has pioneered legal cannabis business practices and provided groundbreaking political engagement and thought leadership to the cannabis community, leading the design and development of gold standard cannabis retail by innovating many firsts for the industry. Andrew began his political career as an activist while studying for his MFA in acting at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. He has starred in several films and runs an entertainment production company, DeAngelo Brothers Productions, with his brother Steve. Andrew is the co-founder of the not-profit The Last Prisoner Project and a founding board of directors member of the California Cannabis Industry Association, where he served from 2013 to 2022. Andrew is certainly impressive, he is well-rounded, and he has made a massive impact in the cannabis space, and as a result on the psychedelic space, because the psychedelic space is standing on the shoulders of the cannabis space. So expect to learn a lot, to be inspired by Andrew's presence and everything he has to share with us, and honestly to be straight up entertained with his stories, because he shares some really just excellent stories with us.
Just a really quick note before we get into the episode. It's me again. I want to let you know that since it is the beginning of December, I am taking on a few fresh clients to start in either December or to hold their spot to start in January this month. So I want to let you know that my prices will be increasing in January. So if you have been on the fence or curious about one-on-one coaching with me and you want to lock in my current rates, now would definitely be the time to get in touch with me. My program will also be changing a little bit, and it will go from a 3-month program to a 6-month program with the price increase. So if you're curious, I suggest you read my testimonials from my clients on my webpage. I'll link those in the show notes for you. And if you want to jump in, get in touch with me, fill out the application for coaching linked in the show notes, or simply message me on Instagram. I can't wait to meet you. All right, let's get into the episode. Hello, I am here with Andrew DeAngelo. Welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're going to be learning about cannabis and your work in it today. So before we get into the juicy stuff, can you please introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. My name's Andrew DeAngelo. Some of your listeners may be familiar with my older brother, Steve DeAngelo. He and I have spent the last 40, 50 years working on bringing plant medicine out of the shadows and into the light. We've done that mostly with cannabis plant, but my brother just built a psychedelic retreat center in Jamaica. And so we are also working with psychedelic master plants and trying to now bring those out of the shadows and into the light also.
Ooh, amazing.
Yeah, I had a company called Harborside Health Center in California during the medical cannabis framework here, and that was one of the largest medical cannabis dispensary in the world, and we had a few different locations throughout California. And then I left the company once the adult use framework flipped over, saw the writing on the wall, and now I started a nonprofit organization called Last Prisoner Project, which is mission is to free all cannabis prisoners. And I hope there'll be an organization like that for psychedelic prisoners as well. And I work as a consultant, consulting both cannabis and I hope psychedelic companies to help them educate folks about the medicine and also create experiences and therapeutic modalities for folks to enter into containers, if you will, safe containers, if you will, for everything from cannabis dispensaries and lounges to ketamine clinics and psychedelic therapy centers. I love to build things. That's what I love to do. And I love to work with entrepreneurs and nonprofits and everybody in our ecosystem to build things in a good way, in a mindful way, in a way that's respectful and reverent of these plants and these medicines. So that's what I'm all about. And that's what I've been doing for the last, I'm celebrating my 40th year in the cannabis trade. So
wow.
Yeah, it's a little milestone for me.
A lot has changed in the last 40 years, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I started, there was a guy named Ronald Reagan was president, and those were pretty...
Wow.
Those were pretty dark days for cannabis and psychedelic reform, and a lot of our people were getting locked up.
Did you ever think we would come to the place that we are right now?
I actually thought we'd get to this place a lot sooner. When I started my activism, and I thought 5-10 years max, and we'll have this done. But it's taken a lot longer. I just thought change would happen faster. When you're young, I started when I was 16 years old. I was very idealistic, but in some respects, I'm surprised that, particularly with psychedelics, what's happened, given the stigma surrounding those compounds for so long, and the power that those master plants and compounds have. Cannabis is also a powerful master plant, but it doesn't have the same kind of power. It's a different type of power. And so I'm a little surprised to see the psychedelic movement proceed so quickly now, especially in the last few years. I'm excited, like all of us in the community are, to see that progress. I'm also mindful of some of the red flags and dangers ahead. That's what I've been doing, and all of our work is just getting started, really. And it's both an exciting and, I think, time where we have to make good decisions.
40 years is a long time. And I think that in itself speaks to just how important this is to you and how devoted you are to this plant. Can you speak a little bit about why cannabis is so important to you, what it's done for you, and really why you have devoted the majority of your life to this?
Many people who have a similar devotion to cannabis as I do will tell you there's a very personal story connected to that devotion, and I'm no exception. When I was 16, I was in high school. I was an athlete. I got hurt. I wanted to be a professional athlete. That was my dream. I came from a broken family. I had a lot of trauma growing up. My brother went to prison. All kinds of things happened. And I was depressed. I was intractably depressed, suicidally depressed. And I was only 16 years old. And luckily, my older brother handed me a joint one day when he saw me in this condition. And a little voice inside my head told me to try it, even though everybody around me, my parents, my school, everything, the society, the television, the commercials, everything was saying, don't do that. The little voice in my head said, do that. And so I did that. I did that, and I felt immediate relief, physical relief from my injury. I had a lower back injury, and it was very painful. And more importantly, really psychic and spiritual relief, because I realized that there was more to my life than sports, and that I could dream lots of different things. I could be whatever I wanted to. I was still very early in my life. And that's what made me so devoted, because that experience, that transformation that I had in my mind, body, and spirit, I wanted other people to experience that. I saw a lot of people around me in the 1980s. It was a very hard time, and people were in obvious need of healing. The Cold War was happening, and there was wars all over the world like there are today, and there was terrible racism like there is today, and nuclear holocaust was something we went to bed and woke up in the morning thinking about. It was as dark a time as we're living in right now, and I saw a lot of people that needed healing around our country, our communities, my school, my schoolmates, my teachers. And so I thought, I have access to this plant, and it did this transformation for me. Now I'm a lot more than just a sports guy. I'm into all kinds of different things. I've been activated. My compassion, my empathy has been activated. My inspiration's been activated. My politics has been activated. And gosh, maybe I can just trade this. I can get this to other people, this plant. And if this, maybe the same thing will happen to them. I knew intuitively being young is terrific because you have this intuitive knowledge. You're such an uncarved block. The world hasn't made you cynical yet, or at least in my case, hadn't made me cynical yet. And so I intuitively knew the plant was smarter than I am, that the plant has a soul, that the plant is speaking to us and teaching us things. And the reason the psychoactivity is there, one reason, I'm not a plant, I can't exactly say it. Probably the reason it's there is to make sure bugs don't eat you. But I believe that plants are the great alchemists of the universe, and they've given us so much, both psychoactive and other healing medicinal things, properties and compounds and teas and all kinds of things. And they have intelligence. And our job is to just tell the story and the history of these things in a good, respectful, reverent way, and to also trade in them in a respectful and sustainable way, and create whatever business models we have to achieve that. I know there's a lot of talk in both cannabis and psychedelic community. Cannabis is a little bit farther along as a quote unquote industry. If you even want to be an industry is a big question in and of itself, but a lot of lessons there. But that's, I think, our job in the community, those of us who want to do this in as righteous a way as we can, as respectful and reverent a way as we can. We have to develop models that reflect that, and no matter what it costs and no matter how inefficient it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like for you in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, navigating the stigma and being such a believer in cannabis?
Well, in the 1980s, we had to hide that we were stoners. I wore it on my sleeve about as much as one could, but if you wanted to interact with mainstream society, and oftentimes that means making a living, you couldn't let people know you were a stoner, and you had to find other stoners using codes. You had to find other people who loved the plants by cultural events and Grateful Dead shows and raves and Burning Man, and all those things were happening in the 90s, certainly, and in the 80s somewhat too. And that's where we found each other, and that's how we communed with each other, and that's how we traded with each other. But I was ambitious, and I wanted to change the mainstream world, not just our own little world. And so that made me an activist, a political activist. That made me a creator, a creative storyteller, and an entrepreneur. But navigating the stigma was tough because you had to be in the closet to do that. And you had to get, just making sure you don't smell like weed. Just that was like really hard and a big deal, because you'd slip up every once in a while and somebody would pull you aside and say, "Hey man, you better go check yourself. You smell like weed." And if you were lucky, someone would check you that way. If you weren't lucky, it would be perhaps an authority figure checking you or a cop checking you. Getting busted was a very real thing. Getting searched, this is when all the search laws got a lot more liberal for the cops, and so they could, if they smelled weed or lied and said and profiled you and said they smelled weed, they could search you anywhere, anytime, any place, especially if you're on campus in a school environment.
Wow.
And people did. If you had a weed leaf patch on your backpack, your locker would get searched. Your backpack would get searched. You would be harassed. It was dangerous to wear a weed leaf. It was like a really risky thing. You had to really think about that. Even a tie-dye t-shirt, right? You had to think about wearing a tie-dye t-shirt. So that was the environment then. It's so hard for us to grok it now, especially if you didn't grow up at that time, right? If you came around a little bit later, it's unfathomable that there was that much stigma and that much danger, that really danger. Then in the 1990s, things got a little bit better because we legalized medical in California. The revolution began, and we were able to reframe cannabis as a medicine. For a long time, our activism was around individual rights and liberty and alcohol, tobacco, why not weed? But those arguments didn't work. It wasn't until we put people dying of HIV and AIDS in front of the cameras and showed that this was medicine for them, and that this was medicine for little old ladies with cancer, and this was medicine for children with cancer, and this was medicine, and we were showing that. We were telling those stories, and when our activism got to the patients, we've seen this, I think, in the psychedelic world too. When we frame this as medicine, one, we help a lot more people. Two, the story of these plants and these compounds in society protects us from backlash. I'm in the camp that pretty much all use is medical, these compounds, even if your intention is otherwise. Certainly with cannabis, there's an endocannabinoid system and something's happening. With psychedelics, it's a lot more complicated, but one could make a similar argument that almost all use is medical. And so when we frame things in this way, it's helpful. Right now, we're seeing a little bit of backlash in cannabis against things that appeal to children. And our community, the cannabis industry, the quote-unquote industry part of it, both hemp-derived cannabinoids, underground folks, and even licensed cannabis, there's just been an awful lot of branding that in mainstream circles is interpreted as appealing to children. And whether it really is appealing to children or not doesn't really matter if enough people think it is. And then we get into a backlash situation. And both our communities, it's really one big community, the cannabis psychedelic community, but they are different and distinct from each other as well. We've experienced backlashes over the last 5-10 decades. But the first backlash was against the jazz musicians and the jazz folks for weed in the 20s and 30s. And then the feds cracked down on that. And there was a big backlash against that. And we've seen it with other things too. We saw it in the 80s and 90s with hip hop music at Cypress Hill. And these folks are creating both pushing the boundaries in really important ways, but also inspiring backlashes. And we've gone through a pretty big arc in the last 50 years. We've seen what happens. And by framing this as medicine, as healing, as something that's in the community largely to heal, that's the story I still believe we should be telling about cannabis and now psychedelics for certain. And I hope that in the cannabis community and industry, we'll move back to those roots that we come from. I hope we'll move back. Is cannabis a fun, relaxing? Yeah, it is. But it's also a very important mechanism for health and wellness. And when you look at the history, I call it the hipstery, we've made the most progress when we've told the story in that manner. Look what MAPS has done with psychedelics, even a pretty powerful synthetic compound like MDMA, very close to FDA approval. And it's because it's a medicine. Okay, this is a healing agent. And a lot of progress has been made in that way. That's the messaging I think is important. And I think it'll help with the stigma. It'll help with backlashes. It'll help with normalizing. It'll help with mindfulness, making sure we're doing this in a good way. And we might have to move a little slower in some regards than we did with cannabis. And maybe we need to pump the brakes a little bit in some respects. But being mindful doesn't always mean slowing down. I think it just means being more aware and behaving accordingly.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your background. I think it put a few things in context for me listening to your story. One, just I get why you're doing what you're doing and why you continue to do it after navigating the stigma that you did while also navigating how life-changing cannabis was to you. And it also put into context, just for me personally, how I take for granted the ability to even have a podcast about psychedelics and speak freely about it and not have to hide that part of myself, because hiding parts of ourselves it's just soul sucking.
Yeah.
It's hard when you can't fully express yourself. And yeah, I imagine that had an impact for you and others growing up, having to suppress that part of yourself.
Right. And if you're in the trade, you have to hide that whole part of your life too. And you spend a lot of your time and energy, your creative energy and your learning energy. You learn how to hide. You don't learn how to grow. You don't learn how to manage. You don't learn how to lead. You learn how to hide, and you learn how to manage with hiding, and you learn how to lead by hiding everybody. And I found that very not so fun. I trained as an actor. That was the thing I wanted to be, in addition to a stoner, when I went to college. And so hiding was just antithetical to being an expressive, creative actor type person. In many ways, it allowed me to hide more effectively, right? Because I could act my way through a lot of hairy situations, and talk my way out of a lot of very dangerous situations. But yeah, it's not a lot of fun to be in a closet of any kind, anybody. So I'm glad that you have that freedom and you feel that sense of freedom. It means progress has been made.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's get into a little bit about the actual plant itself, because this is a new medicine that we're covering on the podcast. And I'm sure that people listening, just like myself, absolutely love cannabis, but don't actually know that much about it. I know I can't be the only one here. I actually want to start with the origin story, if you know anything about that, because I've heard that cannabis first started in India and in Africa. What do you know about the origin story of this plant that you can share with us?
Well, how do human beings come upon this plant, and why is there an endocannabinoid system? Every day you read about archaeological evidence of humans that have been around a lot longer than just a few thousand years. I think there was a fossil dug up recently, 1 million year old humanoid type creature. We've had many civilizations come and go. We've had many types of organizations and tribes and cities, and it's really been quite a long journey for humanity. In the context of life itself, we're on the end of a 13 billion year journey here. So I think that somehow plants and animals evolved together. We're not the only ones with the endocannabinoid system, right? And somehow this plant and the animals and plants survive together. Animals often carry seeds of plants, and when you eat a plant and then you poop on the ground and the seed gets spread that way. So it's a symbiotic relationship. We've emerged from the muck together. and plants are upside down. Their head is where in the roots. Their brain is the roots. Our brain is inside this little container up here, and everything else comes down from that. They're always on their head, and they're grabbing everything from the earth, right? All their alchemy and all the sun, and the outside and is feeding underneath, and underneath is feeding up. And we eat the plants and do all kinds of things with plants. I think it's a very ancient relationship. I think that it was probably food and medicine was the origin, not fiber or rope or fuel. There was recently a study by a chemistry group that they concluded that it was fiber that we started with the cannabis plant. I disagree with that. I think it was probably food or psychoactivity or both. But that was many thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago. And there ain't no way any of us are ever going to know the true actual origin story, I don't think. But it's great to do the archaeology and to learn more and more about it. It appears that if for modern day humanity, call it the last 10,000 years, things emerged either from India or Africa. Probably it might very well have been both, or it could have just been Africa because everything Africa, right? So many things Africa. But I don't know. I do know that cannabis came to the Americas, is not indigenous to the Americas, and came to the Americas by European settlers, and then came from South America into North America by land, or from Jamaica also came in. Psychoactive cannabis was not present with the pilgrims, quote unquote, here, or the settlers, or the colonists, depending on your viewpoint. And they were bringing it for rope and food and oil. They weren't bringing it for psychoactivity or that. There's no evidence to suggest that. There's more evidence to suggest that indigenous folks and slaves figured out the psychoactive part of it by being the ones that grew the plants for the colonists. But there's a lot of evidence that shows that what we now have in North America came from Mexico and Jamaica during the Mexican Revolution, to turn of the century, 19th to 1900s to 20th century, and about 110, 120 years ago is when that migration started to happen. And it didn't take long for prohibition to follow on the heels of that. And again, remember, you're talking about mostly black and brown people who are using cannabis in those days. There was a backlash because of racism and xenophobia, I guess you'd call it. And prohibition, it wasn't about the plant, never has been about the plants, any of the plants. It's about the people who use them. And so that was the origin story. Prohibition was really to continue a police state, if you will, and to go after jazz musicians, black and brown folks, immigrants, Mexicans and Latinos, Chicanos. Yep. And now we're unthawing that. And now we're into a new phase, much more. The thaw is very quickly fading. We're coming out of that ice age and into something that's going to be a lot more enlightened. The age of enlightenment, I think these plants and these compounds are going to bring in a new age of enlightenment, and not a second too soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so is the drug war, right? That's the way it's been. It has never been about the drugs. It's been about targeting certain communities.
I'm afraid
this is not in isolation for that.
I'm afraid that's right. Yeah, I'm afraid that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. What is cannabis useful for? And I know that there's probably so many conditions, but could you just provide listeners with an overview of what cannabis can be very helpful for? And I don't know if you want to get into different strains and all of that, but go ahead.
It was used as a sacrament, really, or earliest on, and as a medicine, putting fuel and fiber aside, just the psychoactive properties. People used cannabis to pray, most likely. The archaeological evidence suggests that. Or to celebrate, or to be in ceremony, or to use as an aphrodisiac or other types of ecstasy-inducing states. No doubt it was used as medicine. We have that in ancient Chinese medicinal texts and Ayurvedic texts from southern India that spell it out.
Wow.
Used a lot for digestion, insomnia, irritability, melancholy, inflammation, all kinds of inflammation, anesthetic, just about anything that you can think of. Cannabis can, for some, if not most people, be helpful for. It doesn't mean that if you have cancer, all you do is cannabis to treat it. No, it doesn't mean that. But cannabis can be part of a treatment regimen that beats cancer. I use cannabis every day. I have some chronic pain. at my age that I treat it for, but I mainly use it to cope, just cope with being alive in this hard modern time that we live in. I cope with this life I've lived, bringing these plants out of the shadows into life. It's a hard road to travel. There's anxiety and insomnia and difficulty and feasts and famines and fortunes won and fortunes lost. And it's a real roller coaster of an existence. And it's been a real medicine for me to lift my spirits when I'm got the blues, or inspire me when I have writer's block, or chill me out when all I can think about is the catastrophes that my mind can dream up, or I'm anxious about a specific thing or just in general. And so that's what I use it for on a daily basis. And a lot of people report the same thing, using it as a relaxant. It's also a wonderful appetite stimulant. You know, getting into strains and terpenes is really hard because the science of that changes literally on the daily. There was a new study dropped yesterday or the day before that questions what role terpenes actually play in the scent of cannabis. So everybody knows when you smell cannabis, or some of your listeners who have smelled cannabis know it's a very pungent plant. The aromas vary between all the different strains. You can smell one strain of cannabis that smells like strawberries, and you can smell another strain that smells like lemons, and you can smell another strain that smells like something that's spicy, that smells spicy, or like an onion. All these different aromas come off the plant. And we've thought for a long time that it was terpenes. Terpenes are responsible for the aromas, or play a role in the aromas of lots of plants, like the rose or the lemon or a strawberry, like I just mentioned. But there's also aromatics that plants have. And so this study that was just released said, oh, no, it's not terpenes, it's aromatics that is doing it. So now we have to figure out the high lab testing costs. Testing for terpenes is like very hard to do. All you can really do is you can test for individual terpenes. It's an enormously expensive process that's really not scalable. What's more scalable is you can test for the total percentage of terpenes that are present in any one sample of cannabis on a percentage basis of the total volume of the plant. So if you're weighing a gram, and usually the terpenes are somewhere between 0.5% and 4%. It's very rare you get a terp profile that's above 4%. Again, these are oils and things in the plant. They're very strong. A little goes a long way. But now there's these aromatics in there. And I don't even know what all the aromatics are called. I can barely name all the terpenes. There's, 25, 30 terpenes. And so it gets very confusing even for experts like me, let alone the consumer, the poor, tired, confused consumer that walks into a dispensary and they see cannabis, sativa, indica, hybrid, doesn't mean anything.
It's so overwhelming.
Yeah, it's totally overwhelming and scientifically wrong. There's the cannabis, the indica, sativa, hybrid, it's wrong. The sativas are not stimulating all the time, or even most of the time for most people. The actual labeling indica sativa is often done wrong, either by the labs or by the dispensaries. The DNA tests of the strains are often mislabeled or renamed. So the consumer is confused. And our community needs to do a lot better job with all of that. Because it's become an industry. If I'm in Pennsylvania and I want to bring in some OG Kush from California, and somebody's got a patent or a trademark on OG Kush, I'll bring it in. I'll just name it Pennsylvania Kush. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, you've got a different name on a strain. And then the next person who grabs the Pennsylvania Kush, and they're like, this Kush thing, I don't like the way it sounds. Let's call it Pennsylvania Pride. And then the strains changed again. And so the labs don't know. All the labs can go for is what the grower says the strain is, unless you do a DNA test on it. And that's, again, very expensive, not required by law or regulation, not done, therefore not done. Unless you're in the business of being a breeder or something like that, and then you're using them, right? So it is confusing. It is hard. Cannabis is an enormous, there's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially strains. It's one of the magics of cannabis. She doesn't want to be put in a box. She doesn't want to be defined as one thing. She doesn't want to be labeled. She doesn't want it. Very hard to have a consistent experience, even when you're growing the same two plants off the same mother, the clones off the same mother. They can turn out different. Literally, the terp profile can turn out different. The aromatic profile can turn out. They could be growing right next to each other in the same thing. And it's part of the power of the cannabis, man. It's millions of years of evolution. This plant has grown in so many different longitudes and latitudes, and all these alchemy that's created both for warding off pests and for embracing animals and others, drawing us to her. So plants don't have feet. They can't move around. And so it's very helpful. But if they seduce these other creatures that have feet and hands and thumbs, and they can propagate and move it around, it's very helpful. I think a lot of the alchemy was the plant just trying to reproduce itself, right? And as all living things want to do.
My relationship with cannabis has not always been so great. It wasn't until I discovered the PAX herb vaporizer that I actually started enjoying cannabis. With joints, I found the effect too powerful and difficult to control. Plus, joints always damage my throat. I have had my first PAX Plus vaporizer for about 5 years, and it is still kicking. I love that it's gentle on my sensitive throat, that I can control the intensity of the high, and the gorgeous and intuitive design. It's truly the apple of vapes. But the thing I appreciate the most about my PAX Plus is that it's the one tool that's granted me a relationship with cannabis, and I love my relationship with it. It's an herb that's supportive for me during psychedelic integration, but it's also my preferred recreational or relaxation substance since I don't drink alcohol. I cherish my nights at home with my PAX and my playlists and music and dancing so much because these are the nights that have helped me to get to know myself and love myself on a much deeper level. Visit PAX.com to browse their selection of herb and oil vaporizers, cannabis pods, and accessories. Whether you want the PAX Plus like I have or any of their other products, you can use Lana at checkout to save 15% off your order. That's Lana, Lana, at PAX.com, PAX.com to save 15%. Or you can simply click the link in the show notes. That's a really interesting take. I love that. And it adds even more confusion to the consumer. Yeah. And I totally relate with that. I'm in Canada, so we have an abundance of dispensaries that I can walk into anytime. And I also always want to have something in my supply here, and I get so overwhelmed, and I don't know what to look for. I don't know what questions to ask. So I'm wondering, let's spend some time offering your counsel to the listeners. What do people need to know when they walk into a dispensary or they're ordering their cannabis or they're looking at different strains? What do we need to know? I heard you talk about terpenes. I heard you talk about THC, CBD, indica, sativa. What are the things that we actually need to know when choosing the right strain? And then there's also different consumption methods, right?
I always advise people to know yourself first. So why are you drawing the cannabis in the first place? And figure that why out. It's going to be a different why for everybody. There might be more than one why. I've got more than one why, but whatever that why is, I'll just use myself as an example. For chronic pain, it's taken me some trial and error, but I've found that capsules work best for me. A live rosin or a whole plant extract capsule. And so now I use those for chronic pain, but I found that for anxiety or insomnia, inhaled cannabis works better for me. When I'm wound up, like by 2 p.m, I've been working like my first 6 hours as done. I'm all wound up because the work days just wound me down from my morning workout and meditation, it's time to have a little inhaled cannabis, take a little break, settle, get myself out of my head, try to get myself back into my heart a little bit, or more creatively in my head. Sometimes it just makes me a little more creative in my head, but it eases my anxiety a bit or takes the edge off of that first. And then in the evening when I'm with my partner and I'm preparing our meal or we're about to have our meal, we like to inhale flower or hash, and that enhances our meal. It stimulates.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, stimulates appetite. And with the inhaled things, I'm looking for something that's going to help me with anxiety and chill me out. So in terms of terpenes, I'm looking for myrcene, or there are these terpene wheels you can find. Leafly's got a good one, and they sort of tell you what the common effects of each terpene are. Okay. The problem is...
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Can you explain very simply, what do we need to know about what is a terpene?
All right. A terpene it's a chemical inside a cannabis plant. Just like...
And are they all psychoactive?
We don't know if terpenes are psychoactive or not.
Interesting.
The evidence suggests they are not psychoactive, that they contribute to what is commonly called the entourage effect. I call it the ensemble effect. So that the alchemy of the plant, some of these terpenes may amplify or de-amplify some of the cannabinoids that may occur in the plant, or bind with them in such a way that it creates an ensemble effect that is unique to that strain or that profile. Now we've got aromatics thrown in there too, but really once you know what it is you're looking for, okay, and what the purpose is, if your purpose is something that's going to be addressed with potency. So let's say you want to take the edge off, but you want to function. You're a single mom. You got to be with your kids. And you find that if you have a little bit of cannabis, you're a little bit more patient with your kids. You're a little bit more present. And you're not in your head as much. You're not worrying as much. And you're not as quick-tempered. But if you take too much, it's not a good experience for you. Because you know yourself now, you're going to want to ask for things with lower potency that are quote-unquote functional. And there is a process of trial and error. There simply is. And that's why a lot of people, when they find a brand that works for them or a product category that works for them, I find that whole plant extract capsules work for me. Doesn't really matter what the strain of cannabis is. Doesn't really matter if it's indica sativa. Doesn't really matter who is the producer. If it's got a certain milligram dose and it's a whole plant expression, I'm probably going to be okay with it. I can't get the same thing over and over again in a whole plant capsule. You simply can't right now. But I can consistently get a whole plant extract of some kind expressed in a capsule. Or I can make my own from live rosin that I grow in my garden, which is something I also do. And potency is a big, important thing to be mindful of, because too much cannabis is an uncomfortable experience for any of us, including me. It's happened to me, I don't know, a couple hundred times in my life. It's not super comfortable experience. And so we want to avoid that. And we want to find that sweet spot. There's a Goldilocks thing. And when people find something that works for them, I certainly encourage them to keep going back to that one thing. But I also encourage them to keep experimenting and widen your scope of products and brands and things that might speak to you. If something doesn't work so good, just don't return to that particular thing again. But keep your curiosity open, because as we've mentioned, there's thousands and thousands of different possibilities here. And you would be doing yourself a disservice if you don't keep checking it out and learning new things about these different product categories and different expressions. And now in certain markets like California, probably in Canada, you can get edibles now that have vitamins in them, that have vitamin B, different melatonin for sleep, vitamin B for stimulation, different nootropics, different supplements and other things in there. The formulations are getting more sophisticated, right? And you could try them out if you have a hard time sleeping. And like, I can't take melatonin. Melatonin gives me really weird dreams and whacks me out, makes me dizzy. I can't take it, but I do take this CBD hemp capsule that's not even THC, just CBD. And for some reason, it works for me. I don't know why. It's a particular brand, a particular group called Hemp Mellow. And they just have a sleep formulation that works for me. And I take that when I'm having a hard time sleeping. It took me a while to find that. It took me a long time to find that. But I did eventually, through my curiosity, I was able to find yet another thing that works for me. And so you find there is an element of trial and error. Good dispensaries with well-trained staffs can be super helpful also. Right now, most doctors and caregivers and nurses are not trained in the endocannabinoid system. They're not trained in all these products. Most of them are not stoners. So it's hard to get information from those folks. But a really well-trained team can give a lot of good information too. And then there's the good old-fashioned internet and reputable information sites like Leafly, like Green Flower Media. These are places that have really reliable, verifiable information that people can study up on before they go to a dispensary. All right. And so that you can be a little bit more educated, because it will be overwhelming. Just expect that. It's like going to Costco or any big box. When I go
into much more calm and soothing.
Yeah. But like when I go to those big box stores, I get overwhelmed. I'm just like overwhelmed by it. Right. It's not quite that. Yeah. It's not like 30,000 square feet of overwhelm. But but there are usually a few hundred products in each dispensary. And there's 30 kinds of flower, and there's 30 kinds of vape pens, and there's, 25 edibles, and there's, which one do you get? And that's why there inevitably is a little bit of trial and error. So have fun with it. Have a good time with it. And as long as you live by the rule of making sure your potency doesn't get above your threshold, you'll learn different things about which things are a little more stimulative, which things are a little more sedative. Sometimes you can go on indica sativa. Oftentimes you can't, but you can go by your own experience, and you can learn certain things about lab test results. Keep a journal. A lot of places have journals, and when you get something with high limeade in it, or limeine in it, you can see what that did to you. And if it gave you a good experience, maybe that terpene's one that your body likes, and see if there's something else and try it again. And, oh, wow, it wasn't the terpene, it was that strain. So go back to that strain and that dispensary, and hopefully they'll have it. And these supply chains are being developed right now. If you think about super well-developed supply chains, they've been around for decades and decades, and ours has not been. And so exercising a little patience with all this is also a wise thing to do. And talk to people in love and trust about what their experiences have been like too. It's a great source of information as well.
I love the approach of it being self-guided and experiential and coming from this place of curiosity. I wasn't expecting this to be your answer. I had all these questions for you around explain CBD versus THC to us, and what are terpenes, and what are cannabinoids, and what is indica and sativa. And I love that you're encouraging people to treat it as their own personal journey and be curious.
I didn't talk about cannabinoids. I guess I should for a second, but because they're finding new ones all the time. But THC is the one everyone knows and loves the most. It's the most common, quote unquote, psychoactive active ingredient, okay, if you will, of the cannabinoids. But there's others like CBD, which are pretty much most people know now, which is not as psychoactive or non-psychoactive and is a great anti-inflammatory at the right dosages, or a relaxant, and I use it for insomnia, like I mentioned. Then there are cannabinoids like CBN and CBG that are also a little bit more for sleep and relaxants, and there are cannabinoids like, I think it's THCA, or THCV, THCV, and that helps you lose weight. I think it is.
Wow.
Yeah. Some cannabinoids inspire the munchies, and like THC, and others like THCV. There's still a lot of science that needs to be done on this, and so don't go out and start calling everybody up and trying to find THCV. But there's some studies to suggest that there's a cannabinoid that can actually suppress your appetite. Cannabinoids are really important because they are active ingredients, whereas terpenes and flavonoids and aromatics are not as active in the scientific sense, but act more as supporting actors, if you will.
Like supplements.
Yeah, like THC is Hamlet and everybody else is carrying the spear.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But we need all of them, right?
Can't have Shakespeare without spear carriers.
Yeah.
Awesome. I carried more than a few spears in my day as a young actor. It's a rite of passage. I, my lord.
I've definitely done some embarrassing Shakespeare in high school and middle school.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, all grown up, professionally trained actors can embarrass themselves with Shakespeare. It's a tough one to get right.
Totally. Okay, so you talked about the spirit of cannabis at the beginning. How have you come to know the spirit of cannabis? And can you explain that to us through your perspective?
Indigenous people and cultures can articulate this much better than I can probably. But I was young. I was 16 when cannabis changed my life. And so I didn't have a lot of default mode networks built yet, if you will. And I was coming out of this, my entire experience from the time I was 3 years old to 16 was playing sports. And I didn't really notice things like nature and creeks and trees. And I never went camping. I didn't notice a lot of things around me. I like I said, I came from a broken family, so I had a lot of trauma. So I was in my head a lot. I was trying to deal with that a lot. And sports was a way for me to get it all out and make sense of the world, because games always have the same rules and they're very predictable. And my life was not very predictable and pretty chaotic and confusing. Cannabis, the plant, the spirit, that plant spoke to me. And I knew that there was something more going on. I didn't have I was basically an atheist before that experience with cannabis. And especially like the first few months, my first, I don't know, call it 50 sessions or 100 sessions, where it's just mind blowing for me. And I knew that there was a web of life. I knew that there was connectivity between all living things. I knew that there was mysteries that I was never going to understand, that were essentially come from stars and stardust. And I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that right here, right now. That was a message that I had never received from any place before. You get a little bit of that when you're growing up somewhat, but I was not raised in church. I didn't have any religion in my family. My mom was a gardener, and so I had some connection to plants. But, I was really, like a lot of people in our modern culture, I was really disconnected from nature. And one of the first things I did when I got turned on to weed was go camping and be outside more. And where, in the 1980s, like I said, it was dangerous. So I used to have to hike into the woods just to smoke a joint. I get away from everybody or meet my friends like in the middle of the forest. There'd be like these patches of forest in between subdivisions in the suburbs in those days. Now they're just all subdivisions. But in those days, there wasn't fully developed yet. And so you could walk into these woods and there'd be nobody there. And you wouldn't get caught smoking weed. Yourself with all these different sprays, and so you wouldn't smell like weed when you walk back home. And so going out into the nature and being in the nature and taking cannabis and getting the psychoactivity from the cannabis while I'm sitting in the woods with friends or even by myself, it brought me more in touch with the trees and the nature and the leaves on the ground and the sun coming through, the creek and the water. I could hear things and I noticed things. And it brought me closer to the universe, the life force of the universe. And now that I've been with cannabis for so long, it's almost an automatic process, but I still approach with a lot of reverence and use cannabis ceremoniously, and it accompanies me everywhere and pretty much through all the important things in life, right? It's been a great friend and teacher to me, and so have other master plants. I just ate a wonderful salad out of my garden yesterday, and it was a spiritual experience. It was, yummy. It was a yummy spiritual experience. It was like, oh, I grew this with my own hands, and these plants cooperated with me, and oh my God, I can't believe it actually happened. And I'm not like a great gardener by any stretch of the imagination. I kill as much as I thrive, but it's this little miracle that happens every time, and those plants speak to me. When I eat them, they speak to me, and I feel that the master plants have master souls, but my little lettuce plant has a soul too, and ultimately we will go back to the plants. When I pass away, I'm going to be composted in the ground, and I will go back to the plants, and the plants will get to be fed by me as I am being fed by the plants. So this is what I've learned.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on the teaching style of cannabis, because I find that every master plant teacher has a different style. So, for example, Iboga is this very direct, clear teaching style. Ayahuasca is this very loving, sometimes confusing teaching style, but she teaches through love and connection to nature, right? Mushrooms can be spacey and windy. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the kind of teaching style of the cannabis plant?
That's a great
I know it's a weird question.
No, it's a great question. I love that question. No one's asked me that question before, and I think people should steal that question from you, because it's an excellent question. One of the first things that happened to me when I first started taking cannabis happens to a lot of people, assuming you have a connection. Some people's first experiences are overwhelming and perhaps not as euphoric as mine was. But when it's a euphoric communication. It's also a humorous sense of humor. Cannabis has a real sense of humor. I remember one of the first times I was stoned, I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and because I was hungry, and it was a pretty hilarious experience to make this peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It was hilarious. Now, I don't laugh like that when I'm stoned and I make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But at that time in my bell curve with the cannabis plant, I did. And so I think a sense of humor. I think cannabis also is very honest. When I've been off my game and I've behaved in ways that were not true to myself or not as respectful of myself, cannabis has told me that. Cannabis has told me when I've been taking too much cannabis. Okay, I mean, it's very honest teacher with a sense of humor that likes to make you feel good, likes to make you feel, not just feel good, but feel. I lost my parents 5, 6, 7 years ago, and sometimes I'll take cannabis and I'll remember them, and I'll be very moved. I'll be moved to tears because it's making me feel that. It's making me in touch with my parents. It's giving me a connection to them. And it's not always a sadness. Sometimes it's a appreciation. It's being moved. It's not being sad. Or it's an extension of just the grieving process, right? That goes on and forever. It wanted me to feel. I didn't smoke a joint saying, okay, I'm going to go visit mom now. I was like smoking a joint at 4:00 one afternoon, and all of a sudden the medicine comes in and I start to think of my mom or a memory of my mother, and I start to really get in touch with her. And I get moved by that experience. Without the plant, I might not have even thought of my mother at that particular occasion, right? And it likes to make you feel things. When I had that experience with my mother, there was a teaching in that. It might have been a little kind of teaching, but there was a teaching in there. And the teaching might have been, it's okay. Mom's alive in your heart, and you can have these moments. And they enrich my life. Right. And that was the little lesson for that particular moment. And it used a feeling to express that lesson. You got to be listening to Cannabis. You got to be listening, because she doesn't deliver her news with the same force that perhaps psilocybin or ayahuasca or ibogaine, but very powerful plant, Cannabis. And I've voiced mindfulness for not overdosing yourself on cannabis. You will feel the power of cannabis if you do that. You'll feel the power of the plant. And with great power commands great respect and reverence. And if you don't, you'll learn the hard way. and it's, sometimes that's a lesson in and of itself. And we're human beings. We're highly fallible. Very fallible, and we learn most of our lessons the hard way. And so that's the kind of spirit I would say that cannabis has. It's like a crystal. It has a bunch of different sides to it, and it definitely requires a good ear. And it's a very internal teacher. It brings you inward. It also makes things outside of you pleasant and beautiful.
Yeah. Music.
Like music, right?
I saw your series on Instagram with the records.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ways to enjoy cannabis is if I don't have any plans on the weekend, I'll just smoke by myself and listen to music. And it is the best experience ever, every time.
Yeah. And it's enriching our lives, right? That's
so much.
Yeah, that's what art does. And I think that's the merging, the integration of art and cannabis and master plants do that even more. I just had my podcast cover artwork created by this amazing artist. And she was like, yeah, I'm doing this while stoned. And I was like, I fully support that. Yeah.
But thank you for explaining your understanding of the teaching style, because that really resonated with me. There is this humor, this lightness in her teaching style, but there is also this great emphasis on feeling things so deeply and feeling things in a way that normally you don't. And then through the intensity of that feeling is an opportunity to learn about it. So I love that. And which is why I find it actually very useful for integrating psychedelic experiences, like after an ayahuasca ceremony or something. If some time has passed, some cannabis really helps deepen those insights. Have you had a similar experience?
I have not had my first ayahuasca sitting yet, but I definitely use cannabis throughout my psychedelic experiences, and certainly as an integration of it. I find for me a smoke really helps ritualize the trip and often settle me down a little bit during the trip. But yeah, I think that integration is a really important part of all this, and it's an easy thing to overlook. I've overlooked it because we live in this modern world, and it's consume the thing, do the thing, move on, and integrating your college education is hard enough, let alone these psychedelic experiences. And it's, oh yeah, I got that, great, all right, moving on. And it really helps to I've gotten a lot more out of my experiences when I've spent a little time with integration, journaling about the experience, seeing where my intention is now that I set for that experience, what my notes right after the experience are now 2 or 3 months later. And these are, if you can be that disciplined, and sometimes it helps to have someone help you with that, a professional or even someone that you're close to, because it's a part of this that it is easy to overlook and not pay attention to. I know I've certainly have it in the past. And I know, gosh, I had a psilocybin experience in 1990, I think it was, at a rainbow gathering in Minnesota that I am still unpacking. Okay.
Wow.
I am still integrating that experience. I still go back to that experience sometimes and spend a little time thinking about the integration of that. Those really memorable ones or really intense ones, in that particular case, it was a very intense trip. They stay with you, and one way or the other, and to mindfully integrate a little bit is a good practice.
I think that means you're probably doing integration properly if you're still integrating it, because there really is so much we can pull from a single experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting to the end of our time here. I can't believe it. This conversation has flown by. We didn't even get to the policy and regulation and all the other things. Maybe we will have to have you back sometime to go over all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm so enjoying this conversation. I have one more question that I really want to ask you as a certified OG stoner that you are. So my thing with cannabis is I freaking love it so much. The one thing that it just makes it a not enjoyable experience for me is that feeling of grogginess the next day. And I find I really have to only consume cannabis on a Friday or Saturday where I don't have work the next day. So I'm sure you have dealt with this yourself. What words of wisdom do you have for people and for me is there a way to avoid that feeling?
That's a really good question. Practice makes perfect. Look, you develop tolerance over time. And if your professional life does not allow for you to consume more regularly, because that's what it takes to eliminate that grogginess, in my experience, and most of the people I know, you reach a point where that doesn't happen anymore, or at least was my experience. Particularly what happened with me when I was very young, I was just starting. Yeah, I would, even just smoking weed the night before, I'd be groggy the next day. But then college happened, and I smoked enough weed in college that I was able to I didn't have grogginess the next day from cannabis. I would from alcohol consumption, of course, but not from cannabis. And then when I started doing edibles more as I got a little older, then I had the grogginess again from the edibles. It's, man, I got an edible hangover. Wah. But then I was able to move through that, and now it doesn't happen to me anymore, really. But look, you're doing the right thing. Make the necessary adjustments. You may, during the day or at certain times, miss it, but know yourself. Like I said in the beginning, know why. And so it's good that you know that about yourself and that you're being a responsible stoner, Lana. And
I try.
Yeah.
Because I work with clients one-on-one, so I really have to make sure that I'm showing up for them.
Yeah,
sharp
of course.
and
Yeah,
focused.
of course. Yeah, of course.
But maybe one day I'll be a certified stoner like you and no longer have grogginess to deal with.
Yeah, I'm a little further along in my stoner career. Yeah. But yeah, I've had different periods in my life. There were periods in my life where I was playing a big part in a Shakespeare play or something. I'd stop smoking weed for a while, for weeks and weeks. And so there have been periods in my life where, for one reason or another, it's hard to play Hamlet and know all your lines. And, so it's situational, right? What I do for a living, my body has adapted to the cannabis I take every day, but not everybody's in the same place. And I'll just end by saying there's this great book, Don Quixote by Carlos Castaneda, the Don Quixote series. And the very first book, I forget the title of it, but there's this exercise that Don Quixote gives the student, and that is find your spot on this porch. It was a porch. And that's all he said was just find your spot. And he left him alone. And it took him like 3 days of going around all these different spots on the porch And then when he was so exhausted and he couldn't stand it anymore, he just collapsed, and that was the spot. And so we have to find our spots. And it sounds like your spot is Friday nights is party time and ceremony time and ritual time and all the things we've discussed today. And you know,
eating delicious food time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's great. And it's, I think, you know, being a responsible stoner is really important for a happy, healthy life.
Totally. Yeah, I'm a big raver as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I got into psychedelics, and I'm a huge proponent of raving responsibly and harm reduction and all of that.
Yeah, dance safe.
Yeah, I've had them on the show. Yeah, they're awesome.
Oh yeah. They're great. And what's the one that MAPS does? Begins with a Z. They do a similar thing at Burning Man every year.
I would have killed to be at one of those 90s raves with you if I could go back in time.
Yeah, the rave scene's changed a lot, but it's still pretty cool. Still pretty cool.
Yeah. I really do seek out the underground ones here in Toronto, and they're a little more similar to how they used to do it back in the day.
Yeah.
I've heard from the older folks. So there's still, you got to look for it.
Yeah, I belong to a rave group. We do it that way too. Yeah.
Yes, I love it. Andrew, this has been so fun and amazing. My cheeks hurt from smiling and listening to you talk.
Me too. I've been smiling a lot too. Awesome.
So fun. Yeah, maybe we can follow up and do another episode sometime on the other side that we didn't touch on. This has been the longest interview I've recorded in a while. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd love to come back. The policy stuff is not as much fun to talk about, but important that we share we share notes on that.
Yeah. Can you tell people before we let you go, just you have some really exciting projects that you're working on, like the Last Prisoners project. Can you tell us what you have going on and what they can look forward to from you?
Sure. Yeah. Last Prisoner Project, the nonprofit I co-founded. Our mission is to free cannabis prisoners. Now that cannabis is getting legal just about everywhere, that you can go to lastprisonerproject.org and go to our Get Active tab. You can plug in if you're a company. You can plug in if you're an individual. You don't have to have any money. You can write letters to prisoners. We teach you how to do that on the website. So there's lots of ways to contribute to Last Prisoner Project. And then I love to build things with entrepreneurs. Like I said in the beginning, you can go to my website, DeAngelo.com. I have a little consulting co-op. You'll see some other great leaders and talented people that I work with and work with me and serve our clients together with. And that's DeAngelo.com. And I'm all over social media. Andrew_DeAngelo is my X handle and my IG handle, and LinkedIn, it's just Andrew DeAngelo. I'm a pretty easy guy to get a hold of. If anything we've talked about sounds interesting enough to get a hold of me, please reach out.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for just consistently showing up, doing podcasts, spreading the word, and just all the things you've got going on. We appreciate you, and thanks for spending time with us today.
Thanks a lot, Lana. I had a great time.
All right. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to and supporting the show. To stay in touch, sign up for my mailing list, which can be found in the show notes or on modernpsychedelics.net. If this episode sparked something within, please let me know by leaving a review of the Modern Psychedelics podcast on Apple and Spotify. This really helps to share these messages with those who need them, which is the whole reason why I do what I do. And if you haven't already, come join the ongoing conversation over on Instagram with other beautiful souls. We have an incredible and conscious community over at the handle Modern Psychedelics. And don't forget that the work begins after you come back down to earth. And I'm standing shoulder to shoulder, doing it with you. This episode is produced in collaboration with Film with Integrity. They are a values-forward production studio providing end-to-end production from concept to content. They do event video, documentary series, commercial and marketing videos, and of course, podcast production. If you are working on a project that deserves quality of production and content without sacrificing heart and soul, visit filmwithintegrity.com to check out their beautiful work and get in touch with their team.